places and also time. Oh, do you see the next slide? No? Okay. Sorry for this.
At the end of slideshow, so you have to come back to the very beginning.
Ko tad?
Nu, labāk tā drošāk, jā.
Redzam, labi.
Tagad ir.
Okay. So again, every human being's personal history and identity is interwoven with space, places, and also time. However, the issue of place and the relationship between people and place becomes particularly important and quite often problematic in the case of displacement, both voluntary and forced, which in itself is a process that involves the loss of place. Consequently, researchers of migration as well as refugee studies pay close attention to the intensified longing of voluntary and even more forced migrants for their place of origin as ultimate reference, and to the presumption of a paradise, whose loss or absence preserves migrants in a kind of a negative space. Such forced migrants were also those inhabitants of Latvia who, during the end phase of the Second World War, left Latvia and later became part of the Latvian exile community or diaspora in the free world, often gaining traumatic experience in the course of these events. However, as stated by the psychologist Reno Papadopoulos, loss of home and not trauma is the only condition that all refugees share. In other words, refugees are defined not as a group of people exhibiting any specific psychological condition, but merely as people who have lost their homes and homelands, which is not only a physical, but even more so a psychological and social experience, especially because home is an important part of one's place identity. The phrase place identity has been found and used since the late 1970s and is described by the researchers as potpourri of memories, conceptions, interpretations, ideas, and related feelings about specific physical settings, as well as types of settings. Place identity is a substructure of social identity like gender and social class. It is also described as cognitive database, against which every physical setting is experienced. At the same time, it is also a process by which, through interaction with places, people describe themselves in terms of belonging to a specific place. There's also a deep relation between place and time, because a space experiences historical change, while at the same time changing our own relationship with the space. And therefore, it is impossible to judge the space around us and the place where we are located as isolated from the past events associated with them. Each place in a story is linked both to an event and the chronological boundaries of this event. Thus, places mentioned in life stories, whether event locations, projected locations, or merely episodic locations, are all recorded along with the time period. If returning back to the specific relation between place identity and diasporas, where the lost home and homeland plays a special role, we should stress out that migration itself, whether voluntary or involuntary, as in the case of Latvian exile community, involves the polarity between home and absence. And given the uncertainty surrounding the possibility of or impossibility of returning home, for migrants, home and homeland becomes as some sacred place, a place which, on the basis of the features that individuals attach to it, gives them the driving force to maintaining their identity. Consequently, in the perception of exiles, home and homeland is at once a memory and a hope. On the one hand, it is a mythical place of desire in the diasporic imagination, but it is also a place of no return, even if it's possible to visit the geographical territory that is seen as the place of the origin. In the result, returning to one's homeland often causes fundamental nostalgia or the so-called reverse culture shock, as it makes one perceive something that was there in the past or imagined in the past and that cannot possibly be recreated. That is why, in the eyes of the exilees, homeland becomes the lost paradise, a mirage of the past that one will never be able to recover. This is true also in the case of Latvian exile community or diaspora. And would the place identity narratives differ across life stories of different generations of Latvian exiles? However, before addressing these questions, we must also clarify that at the first our intention was to speak about exile Latvian first and second generation life stories, meaning by that the generation born in Latvia and leaving it in 1944-45 and their children as the second generation, those who were born in exile. However, soon enough, we also realized that it would be maybe more accurate to speak about 3 generations, because in between there are those who were born in Latvia, but were quite little when leaving it. And their experience, life stories, and also place identity seems somehow different from those who were grown-ups during the Exodus. And accordingly, we will try to compare these 3 generations. As for the first generation, in many life stories, the issue of place and identity is quite clearly defined and show that the loss of home and homeland didn't indeed lead to a nostalgic disorientation. For example, the feelings of a woman born in 1926 are described as following. I quote, "I have a real physical pain for Latvia. I have such a longing for Latvia. But since my father was in the army, we had no property there where I could return now." End of the quote. This and other quotes confirm the existence of a feeling of emptiness and lacking, as well as the fact that this nostalgia is focused not only on the physical place, but also on the people, mutual relations, and the environment in general. Also, these life stories are witnesses to such a longing for homeland that it manifests itself as a discomfort in the body, a body which feels out of place. Even more striking narrative about bodily experience is expressed in another life story of a woman born in 1915, and which you can also read in the slide. And in this case, it was exactly the return home that caused the culmination of this nostalgic disorientation, which manifested itself in a physical form, depression. And this case also confirmed some researchers' observation that no matter how strong the bond the exilees have established with the new environment, it cannot replace the strong attachment with the place of origin. It is significant that in the continuation of the mentioned life story, another aspect appears, which is of great importance in the place identity narratives of many first-generation exile Latvians. And as we can see, I mean, these are quotes on the slide. As we can see, these narratives fully in line with the before-mentioned observation that it is not possible for the exilees to return to the place that has remained in their memory. Respectively, the refugee journey of this particular exile woman and also others has led only in one direction, as she herself realizes that she has not returned to the same place from which she originally departed. In other words, this place is destined to live only in her memories. In a similar way, also other life stories as first-generation exile Latvians show that they feel very sharply that homecoming would involve not a spatial but a temporal journey back to a non-existent era, which, as they well understand, is not possible. For this reason, some first-generation Latvian exiles have deliberately chosen never to go back to Latvia, as you can also read in the last example of the slide. It should also be borne in mind that exilees, and most likely this would affect the first generation, often develop a fixed and backward-looking image of their homeland, in which it is therefore very difficult or even impossible to incorporate the changes that have taken place there, regardless of whether they are positive or negative changes. The reasons for all that, most probably, is that the time spent in Latvia, which was the formation period for the first generation exile Latvians, left a very deep impact in a way that they felt as Latvians for their whole lives and couldn't even imagine to completely assimilate in their host countries. At the same time, the very lively and positive memories of their homeland, the new reality in it during and after the occupation period, and also the long time spent in the host country, also having bought or built their own houses there, made it very hard for some of them to feel at home in Latvia. Probably the imminent change that happened while they were away and the vivid memories of their youth there always stood as a striking evidence of what was lost, or as we can say, taken away from them. And now, if we return to this, as I call it, generation in between, those who left Latvia as small children, what strikes me as a very interesting thing is that their place identity seems even more complex, meaning by that quite often these people don't feel at home anywhere, including Latvia. For example, a woman born in 1941, so she left Latvia when she was 4 years old, and describes her feelings as following. Maybe it's very sentimental that I feel at home in many countries, but I don't feel at home anywhere. And Latvia is included there as well, because always when I'm in some country, I want to enjoy the way those people live there. I'm going there with the open heart and soul, you might say. But as I say, I feel like a stranger in all these countries, and even in Latvia. And a quite similar quote you can also read in the slide. And if we think about the reasons for such place identity, then most likely it can be explained by the fact that these people experience the turbulences of the war and being refugees as small children. And from one point of view, this meant that they could not really grasp what was happening around. But from another point of view, they could sense all the obscurity and the feelings of their parents. And later, their parents usually were putting all of their effort in raising them as Latvian and to implant the image of Latvia as deep inside them as possible. Another aspect is that they usually had to go through a phase of not fitting in, most commonly when starting to go to school, because often they were only speaking Latvian at the time, and also because it was usually stressed out by their parents, and by others, and also by themselves, that they are different. In the result, their identity as being Latvian was very strong, but at the same time, the image of Latvia and memories of it was not so alive in them as for the first generation exile Latvians. And as one of the authors explains, I quote, I am with my parents and I myself chose to be, and what I feel in my heart, and I have always felt like Latvian. In the same time, she also says that she doesn't truly belong in Latvia, or in either of the countries she has lived in. Again, of course, such a feeling and place identity cannot be too largely generalized, because we can find also opposite narratives among this in-between generation. For example, an example of such narrative of a woman born in 1940, you can read in the slide. Also, this last quote in the slide marks a very deliberate, proactive approach aimed at maintaining a sense of home associated only with the country of origin for all the long years of exile, without allowing the formation of a new place identity in the country of residence. This confirmed the observation that people play an active role in relation to a place that is, meaning they form their place identity in an existential relationship with the geographical environment. At the same time, this narrative contradicts the assertion that, in general, migrants who have experienced at least two places during the course of their lives attach themselves to both of these places and are more or less rooted in both of them. Obviously, by actively cultivating only one place identity, this attachment and rooting may not take place. The fact that this did not happen in this particular case is also confirmed by the fact that this author returned to live in Latvia after it regained independence. But now let's turn to the second generation, that is, those whose connection with their fatherland was shaped through their parents' stories and memories. And obviously, through these stories and memories, also the historical experiences, as for example of repressions, persecutions, traumas of war, followed them to the new homelands. And the issue on question here is what role has parents' migration and experiences that caused their decision to leave their homeland have for their children's historical consciousness and for their place identity. In what way do they relate to, manage, and negotiate their parents' history in interaction with their own story of growing up as children of refugees? Obviously, parents play a significant role in our lives. This attitude, of course, gives way to the rebellious nature of teenagers, but subconsciously remains waiting to mature in adulthood. Although there is an inherent desire to be like one's parent, nevertheless, the situation of double identity could lead to the conflict with parents, an absolute denial of one's own ethnic identity. Respectively, the stories and concepts of parents are sometimes accepted by the next generation, but sometimes on the contrary. It is the base for generational conflicts. On the whole, our observation is that the second generation of Latvian exiles usually have double place identity. On the one hand, it is the one experienced by their parents, idealized by the traumatic experience, and nostalgic. On the other hand, it is a place identity of their own, based on their real experience at the present time and place. For example, Mara, who represents the second generation, says that her life was living in two parallel lives in the same time. She has always participated very actively in Latvian diaspora life because, as I quote, Latvian life is more interesting, saturated with culture, literature, songs, and dances. But she also has long narratives about her study time in Uppsala University, social life, friends, events, which underlines that the place is close connected with the event. Another example is Marika, who was born in Sweden in 1949, but her family moved to the United States soon. Until her 20s, she was very far from Latvian community, trying to avoid contacts with it. Her parents talked with her Latvian, but she talked to them in English only. However, when she was 20, she was invited to some Latvian get-together, and this is how she describes her reaction. I quote, "Oh, it was a surprise to me. The people were so lovely, and I began to learn Latvian actively, and then I began to get into Latvian community." Now Marika lives in Sweden, but she says that she feels as American Latvian, and she would never be Swedish, although Sweden has been her home for more than 20 years now. And the last slide. So another thing which can be seen in the interviews with the second generation is that the isolation, denial from the parents' experience, and one's ethnic identity dominate in early youth, when the desire to know more and integrate prevails. However, the feelings of Latvianness, attitude to the ethnic homeland as one's home and one's place, appears again later, for some at the age of 16, for others later at 20, 25. And several such examples you can read in the slide, but one I will quote, and it is from a woman born in 1960, and it also tells about her first visit to Latvia. I quote, "All the meetings, the language, the literature, it made me, but not my brothers, want to see Latvia. My older brother, he was disgusted by all this. He actually turned away from Latvians. He didn't like being driven by force. Tragically, his interest in Latvia arose very late. At the end of the 80s, he came to Latvia. Then I took him out here and there, and then I finally felt that he comes to life. and that his interest in his homeland revives. For my younger brother, everything there is corruption. He's not coming here. His children speak Latvian very well, but he only sees the bad side here. He likes America, he's an American patriot. And about her first visit in Latvia, she says, "For me, it was a shock. I didn't like Riga on the first day. I remember Riga seemed very unloving to me. But later, I completely fell in love with people and everything. It was like instant recognition. Yes, this is Riga." End of quote. And so, in the conclusion, we just want to refer to human geographer Edvards Bunkše, who also happens to be a representative of Latvian diaspora and who left Latvia as a child, and who also has spoken about his feelings after his first visit to Latvia, and which we think is very, fits very well. So I quote, "Home place, it is much more than a national hymn, nice city, beautiful landscape, sea, song festival, some relatives and friends in your fatherland. Nostalgia about native country cannot overcome the course of time." Thank you. That would be it. I stop sharing.
Yes, thank you, Maija, and thank you, Maruta, for co-authoring this paper. Now the floor is open for comments, questions. Is there any hand raised? I don't see yet. Yeah, Vieda, please. Your mic is off.
We can't hear you. You have to switch on microphone. Unmute yourself.
Have I done it?
Yeah.
Maija, as a person who might have been part of your cohort of interviewees, I was struck by the fact that you had people who either felt at home in one place or felt at home in the other place, or who felt at home in neither place. But I wondered whether there was a fourth option, which would apply to me, that you feel at home in both places and that you see that as an enlargement of your identity, not a problem, not a constriction.
Maija, sorry, Maija, but we had also such interview when the man told that he felt himself good both in London and both in Riga, and he said, "When I am in Riga, I am thinking, oh, what should I do in London? When I am in London, I'm thinking, oh, I must go to Riga." It depends, I think, maybe on character or maybe on the family and on the life course.
Yes, but this man was also from the second generation.
Yes, it's from he was born in 1960, I think.
Because probably for the first generation, such a feeling would be very rare, I think.
So I also should add that both in the preparing the paper and both in our discussions, it was always was difficult to make these borders of generation. Yes, it's how to say, not very strong. And I want to add one moment. We are talking about the individuals born in exile, about this third or second generation, and that they feel themselves with double identity in different aspects. But we did not reach the individuals who are Latvians, who are absolutely Swedes or Germans or Americans or English, because we did not reach them. And I think it's a question how how do they feel? I propose that they feel this only one identity.
It's also a question of how you're perceived, because when I'm in Latvia, I was surprised to learn that people referred to me as the English woman. Which is an identity that I didn't at that time want to own.
But maybe to reach such people, it's from one side, maybe it's a problem of language. Then if we want to reach a person who is Swede, we need translator, and then this interview is not so so close, so sincere, so open. But we also have experience with persons born in exile in 1953, who also felt himself very aggressive to the interview, and who didn't want to give the interview. So though he also feels half Latvian, half Swedes. I think it's very connected with also with personality and with family. And
if I may add to Vieda's comment, yeah, I also think that we need to try to cover all this spectrum of sense of belonging to one or another place, and including Latvia, where the person was born, or where only his parents have been born, or even for her grandparents. But in this connection, I would like to draw attention to a new publication. Maybe some of you know it already, some of you may not know, but that the title of that publication is quite symbolic. It seems I even don't know how to pronounce it. Not having come back, or not having ceased. Nepārbraukušie. So one letter is missing, and that refers to this ambivalence, it seems, because they are in the process. They are as if in the process of coming back or returning to their fatherland, but they still are on their way.
So what's the missing letter there?
I don't know. It's up to the reader to fill. B or B or T.
T nepārtraukušie.
Yeah, or nepārbraukušie. Nepārtraukt or nepārbraukt.
Sorry, I'm just saying bye because I'm leaving for the other thing in Zoom.
Yeah.
Okay,
thank you, Maija, very much, and
yes, thank you so much.
see you tomorrow.
thank you, Maija.
thank you. See you.
So maybe there are other questions or comments which Maruta can still handle.
Not question, but I could say that I met for example, one gentleman who is grandson of before mentioned Ernest Viestiņa, who doesn't feel himself as Latvian. He doesn't speak Latvian, but he came here with this project. He has a photo project, and he want to he look for companion. But about national identity or ethnic identity, there are no any question, there are no interest from himself. So I think that many are people who don't feel themselves as Latvians who born in abroad.
But maybe he's interested in his place identity. It's not ethnic identity, but he feels some this place as an attractive place, as no?
No, 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 but it is one example. Maybe it could be several and different, very different.
How old is that person? It would be interesting to know.
Who?
Roughly, how old is the person whom you just mentioned with the project?
Sviestiņš. He has a family Sviestiņš. Latvian.
Good.
Surname.
Live in Sweden.
So is that second or third generation person?
Second,
Second.
but at 60s born.
My generation would say.
I think what's also important is the attitude of the host country, because, for example, when my family moved to England in 1949, if you spoke another language which was not English, that was highly stigmatized. And this didn't just apply if you were black or came from the third world, but I've read of people with Scandinavian parents who came to England, that simply being not English was a source of stigma. So I don't know what America was like in that period, but a lot, I imagine, would depend upon the attitudes of the host country and the needs of the child to feel accepted and not stigmatized. Because without going into personal details, the people that I know, who some of whom are older than me, who've become very anglicized, have done so, I think, out of personal insecurity, because the stigma of coming from a country that was unknown, could not be identified, I think was very hard for young children, and therefore the wish to pass as English was reinforced, and of course in most cases that stays with you through adulthood.
There are such examples in USA too.
I mean, you can see, for example, even today, when there is a family with young children where they are speaking a language from the Indian subcontinent, that while they're standing at the bus stop, the child is speaking Hindi or Marathi to his or her mother. When they get on the bus, the child switches to English. And this says, I think, more about English society than it does about the immigrant child.
So,
I want to say that
it's quite late, Mara, and I think that I hope that I would like to have some questions too, and Martin for sure as well. It is more than 40 minutes for this first one presentation. I'm sorry, but
Yeah, I also think, yeah,
Quite
that's
long day.
probably my responsibility, and I think we do need to move on and to give floor to Baiba.
Yeah, and please stop me after some 15 minutes. I will take some time control too, but this, yeah, and I'm Baiba Bella, and used to work with Mara and Maija and Edmunds and Ginta. Yeah, and now I floated to Faculty of Social Sciences, and now I would like to switch your attention to completely different generation of young mobile persons and construction of their migration and return experiences, how these are published in the weekly magazine here. The background, I paid attention to these interviews because I'm a participant in national research program towards sustainable development and inclusive society in Latvia, response to demographic and migration challenges. And one of work packages pays attention to this international migration and these complex relations between this demographic change and migration and social sustainability, and to highly skilled migrants in particular. And during the last quarter of 2018 and almost all 2019, there were very interesting series of interviews titled Back Home with return migrants. There were 28 interviews. So you can notice that we have 52 weeks per year. So interviews were not published in each magazine, but anyway, with some frequency. And in some cases, also their spouses participated in the interviews. So it together it shows experience of about 40 people. And I was very interested in how the migration experience is constructed in these publications. Because this probably is some new public discourse of migration. Because all previous decades, the discourse of migration as loss and emigration, or this great departure, was one who dominated. And these interviews with return migrants deliberately constructed completely different public discourse of what migration experience is. And therefore I found it quite interesting to pay more attention to this, especially because there is a lot of parallels in interviews we did in the research, and my colleagues did in previous research with return migrants, Ortens nationals also. And however, interviews in the journal is not the typical biographic data. I found it quite interesting because anyway, these are based on biographical narratives and include and covers these reasons for migration, experience abroad, reasons for homecoming, the changes resulted from these migration experiences in their lives and so on. And of course, these interviews draw a certain portrait of generation. All heroes of articles are young people, mainly in their 30s and early 40s. Some in their late 20s, but mostly heroes are in their 30s, who, after some years abroad, chosen to return home. And I wanted to apply discourse analysis. I was a little bit in short of time, so at present moment it's just some insights of that. theoretical background of this discussion probably is also about this idea that mobility is a new ontological condition. Almost all research also in migration studies somehow departs from this methodological nationalism or nation state as a reference point, and also studies migration of something which is opposite to stasis or fixity. And some of contemporary researchers are interested to see mobility as a new ontological condition. And I had the impression that these interviews are somehow constructed in this new discourse of mobility as new ontological condition. So I wanted to do some more research to understand whether my first impression is right or not. Migration studies aims to understand these ways in which migration forge new experiences, lives and selves under these conditions of mobility. And in a way, these publications allows to explore how these experiences are constructed, and how they are constructed beyond these nation-state borders and boundaries created by Latvian culture or social milieu. Little of context. Here you can see the numbers of immigration. Still, I think this COVID year probably will be first with quite balanced immigration and emigration rates. But immigration, as you can see, is growing, and which is also quite interesting. Numbers of return migrants are quite high within these total immigration numbers. And however, we can see the trends, and also one of trends shows that return migrants prefer to stay in Riga and around Riga, and less are turning to countryside. However, these publications are trying to choose people on different locations. So they are, some of them are returned to Riga, some of them return to small towns, and some of them choose to stay in really small places, in villages, and in one case even the home is in the middle of woods, forests in Latgale. And majority of emigrants are quite young, but also majority of emigrants are quite young. So we can say that journal deliberately choose to interview young people and publish. And I think that the choice to publish these interviews with return migrants in Latvia's anniversary year also is quite important here. Some more, I would say, more thematic analysis, what we can see within the portrait of those who are interviewed. So their experiences represent predominantly Europe, but also some regions outside Europe. And from these, I would say 28 Latvians who are interviewed, because with their spouses are different. Some are Latvian, some are not. Only 6 persons have experience of migration in 2 countries, and only 2 persons in more than 4 countries. They lived more than 6 months in each country. So usually this is more, still this quite traditional home and destination migration. But you see the choice is to really show the difference of destination countries, different migration trajectories and experiences, and also different places of return. So it really gives a very interesting picture, these publications. Also, reasons for emigration for this generation is quite different as it is for all the generations. Especially East Europe is famous in migration literature as referred as main reason for emigration. It is financial reasons, but for this young generation, main reasons for emigration in very few publications, indeed, in very few interviews, the main reason for emigration is to earn money. Mostly these are studies, new experiences, new challenges. For those who already have professional skills or education, some degrees, they are looking for professional growth and new experiences and new challenges in their professional experiences. In some cases, also love was the main motivator, and not just for ladies, also for young men. This can be reason for emigration, and the same can be said as for return migration. So as time is running, I would love to move forward, and each interview is followed by one picture, whether it is with family or only the person interviewed. And also the choice is very interesting, because those who are interviewed outside Riga mostly are pictured within the neighborhoods, like this family with their house. And I had no time properly translate the title of interview. In this case, they choose to quote from the interview, "Tu esi tā valsts, you are that country." And this is about this attitude of people towards, in this case, towards Latvia, that you are the country. About reasons for return in interviews, they are quite the same as appears also in other research, like missing the family members these emotional reasons are quite pronounced. As most of these are young families with small kids, or many of interviewees. Very important aspect is that they want their children to grow as Latvians, because this assimilation is very intense, as you noticed in previous narratives as well. Also, this belonging and belonging to Latvia and need for proper home, like this quote, "Mājas var būt tikai Latvijā." Yeah, true home can be only in Latvia. We could translate it like that too. And as we know, many return migrants are soon emigrating again. Except one person, almost all interviewees saw their future in Latvia. And probably even within the interviews in research, this was more pronounced, but here also it was a repeating motive that while you're working abroad, you're working for your own prosperity or well-being. But when you're working in Latvia, there is this feeling that your work contributes to the developments in homeland. Also, after having experience abroad, this quality of environment is evaluated absolutely differently. Like clean nature, clean food, it is seen as really something excellent here. And also the opportunities of fast career growth, or opportunity to build something of your own, is also some of quite recurrent themes, topics. And for those who does not read Latvian, there are these quotes, like one of them is that a person one of motives is that I want to prove that Latvia is a place of opportunities. And the one below is very interesting. It shows these emotional affiliations. It is something like, I love Latvian mud, but not this healing mud, but this real dirt mud on the grounds you have in autumn and spring. So you can love mud. So I need to stop, but please 2 minutes more, yeah. And yeah, my 15 minutes is over now.
But
And I almost
it has 20 minutes. We are
20?
Yeah.
Ah, nice. But no, anyway, it's quite late. And yeah, I choose to show pictures from 4 interviews. Here is again young family. And this the bigger share of love. I don't know how to translate it really properly. Yeah, it can be how to say, understood also metaphorically in their family, in Latvia, and so on. And also this experience of reintegration is quite interesting. And probably it is less about discourse, so I will skip this part because this is more about some topics covered by interviews in magazine, and also quite overarching, especially these positive experiences of return with what we have in our interviews in the research. This is again one of returning families. In this case, the husband is French, if I'm not mistaken in my memory. Yeah, this lady couldn't find a work in her profession. So after 8 years abroad, they choose to return back because he as IT specialist can work from everywhere. But she has profession which can be better. She can find place in no better work opportunities here in Latvia. Few words about this construction of migration experience, because I was very pleased also by that Professor Andrews cited Habermas, that we are always talking about identity, who we are, and who we would like to be. Also, these stories also make this new narrative of who we are. Who are these young Latvians? They're active, mobile, free. This mobility is indeed created as some kind of new normality in these stories. And this is nothing exceptional. Yeah, we choose to we can choose our place of life. What is hidden here, of course, is this mobility as opportunity. If it is available for all people, if some migrants more welcome than others, and so on, like we see these African migrants can't move so freely as Latvian migrants can. Yeah, like these inequalities are quite hidden from the discourse of mobility pictured in these interviews. A very interesting aspect also is this diversity as value and new normality. And this is quite important because this coincidence also with other interviews that Latvians who lived abroad are quite critical about the low levels of tolerance they find here in Latvia. And this is something quite stressed, that they are missing this diversity and they're missing this tolerance. And this is something they would love to change here too. But the interesting part is that discriminatory experiences of them as migrants are almost hidden. And I'm very curious if they indeed didn't experience anything like that, or simply this publication is too short to mention this. This one lady or two are a little bit mentioning the difficulties to find a job because the preference is given to locals. These are just one small quote in one interview. the topic of belonging and rootedness in Latvia. This is very interesting because this is has quite long tradition in Latvian public discourse of belonging and love for Latvia. So we can see also these traditional notes. And in this case, it is combined with this cosmopolitan openness. And also very interesting is this movement of appreciation of positive things here in Latvia after being abroad. Because usually here, so-called Latvians are very critical to everything which happens here. But when you have experience of different, let's say, life worlds, you are changing your perspective. Yeah, here is one of heroes, and I can put the end of my story here because this is very interesting how this publication is actually coining a new discourse of positive return, which is quite controversial to this former discourse of emptying of the country. And I would love if some moment we could have more broader discussion of this discourse of spreadītis, because here it is clearly message in many interviews that there's no place better as home. And it's quite interesting how this is reappearing, this homecoming. Because many elements of the discourse is completely new with this new European mobility and cosmopolitan worldview and tolerance and diversity and so on. Yep. So thank you for your attention.
Yes, thank you very much, Baiba. That's really very nice that we have drawn to the conclusion of this first day of the conference with this insight into more recent sentiments and more recent
migration experiences.
Experiences. So the floor is open now for comments and questions. So, Vieda, it seems you wanted to ask.
Yes, Baiba, thank you so much for that fascinating insight into returnees. And I wonder whether you've considered the role of the coronavirus in this, because certainly in the UK, there's been a turnaround with the emptying of urban centres and the huge retreat to the countryside. The price of country properties has shot up over this last year, and cities are no longer seen as the desirable residence. And certainly in the first few months of the virus, there was very little. The Baltic countries were seen as being the safe countries. That's changed a little bit now, but I wonder long term how this, how the presence of this virus and also the fear of future pandemics and future viruses, how that will influence the return to a rural, more individual life. Your comments, please.
This goes out of scope of these interviews, but from my observations as I'm looking for place of residence myself all this year, this is the trend now in Latvia too, that prices for rural houses are, they're not going exactly up, but they are staying stable and quite high. And as my observation of many of colleagues are that they are used to work from their country houses. They are out of Riga, many of them. So, yeah, I don't have any precise data about these mobility patterns of COVID impact in Latvia here. I just heard from this it's a new ambassador of diaspora that many Latvian families joined these repatriation flights because this was their opportunity to get back home. And this probably is the trend when the situation is critical. I expect that this year this return migration was will be much higher than it used to be in previous years, but we will see when statistics will be completed.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's quite late. Yeah, okay.
May I a small question? My name is Kristīna Rolle and I'm PhD student and researcher at Riga Stradiņš University. My question is not directly related to your topic, but to one slide at the beginning of your presentation. And if I understand correct, the smallest number of return migrants is in Vidzeme. Do you have any explanation why it's so? Why Vidzeme is less attractive?
No, I think it's not because Vidzeme is less attractive, but simply Vidzeme is a region with it is less inhabited region, I would say. If you are looking on numbers of population in all regions, Vidzeme is less populated simply there.
Okay.
Because, for example, Cēsis is one of the first municipalities who started very targeted work towards diaspora of Cēsinieki. And now I know also Valmiera and Smiltene are doing the same. They are very targeted. They are doing some very targeted work to their diaspora to attract them back. So even the numbers don't look very high. The region itself is less populated.
Parts of it. Not all of it.
Yeah.
Parts
Of course,
around
parts.
Almuksne there.
Maybe it's connected also that people from Vidzeme did not emigrate so many as from Latgale and from Zemgale. Maybe we must look to the statistics about emigrated population. Maybe
probably,
it was not so high as it was in Latgale or in Zemgale. Maybe.
Okay, it is homework.
Yeah.
My statistic is from Latgale and Vidzeme. I check it so.
Quite high. Okay. Yeah, then I think that I can stop here and.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for questions.
Thank you, Maija. So it seems we have run out of steam today, and would like maybe to save some more for tomorrow, since we have quite a long day tomorrow.
No, for last speaker.
Is there?
No, of course.
Not on my list.
Yeah. I'm looking forward, Martin, very much.
Who is the last speaker?
No, Martin Num.
I am.
Oh, there was some swap, which I wasn't aware of.
Yeah.
Then maybe Edmunds can take over the moderating, because I'm lost now with my program. Edmunds.
Oh, sorry, but yeah, we switched some papers.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I hope we have a enough time to listen for Martin's.
Absolutely, full half of hour and a little bit more, yeah.
So can everyone hear me?
Yes.